Dear colleagues, guests, welcome to the meeting number 37 of the Standing Committee of Official Languages. In accordance with Regulation 1083F of the motion adopted on April the 21st, 2026, we are meeting today to consider the draft regulations on the use of French in federally regulated private businesses. I would like to now welcome our witnesses. From the Office of the Commissioner of Official Languages, Kelly Burke, Commissioner of Official Languages. Good afternoon, Mrs. Burke. Patrick Wolf, Deputy Commissioner, Compliance and Law Enforcement. Pierre Leduc, Directorate General for Strategic Orientation and External Relations, Deputy Commissioner, and Pascal Giguère, Advocate General, General Directorate of Legal Services. I hope I've pronounced your names correctly. Thank you. You will each have 5 minutes to deliver your opening remarks, and then we will proceed to a question and answer period with the committee members. Mrs. Burke, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Chair, honourable members of the committee, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. It is part of the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, an indigenous people of the Ottawa Valley. I'm very happy to be with you today to talk about the draft regulations that aim at providing a framework for and ensuring the implementation of the Use of French in Federally Regulated Private Businesses Act. This new legislation was introduced to foster and protect the use of French in federally regulated private businesses operating in Quebec and in regions with a strong Francophone presence outside of Canada.
And practical regulations. As currently drafted, however, the regulations do not meet this standard.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur Djougouda. Ça marche?
La traduction, là.
Point of order.
Madame la commissaire, c'est parce que vos propos sont...
Your words are very important. It's much easier for me to understand you in French. Maybe we could start again because I couldn't hear the translation.
Madame Burke, désolé pour l'interruption.
Mrs. Burke, we really apologize for the interruption. We've just been asked if you can say a few words in English to see if
This objective requires clear, consistent, and practical regulations.
Ça marche, Madame Burke.
It works well, Mrs. Burke. Would you like to continue or would you like to start over? As you wish. I'm going to continue the part in English. I think the French was heard. Thank you. So I'm going to start the sentence over.
Clear, consistent, and practical regulations. As currently drafted, however, the regulations do not meet this standard. They are complex and contain significant ambiguities regarding terminology, application, and the scope of the rights and obligations prescribed. In my opinion, the regulations should mandate a reliable, regularly updated public registry of federally regulated private businesses, including those subject to the new federal legislation and those that are exempt. The registry would be very useful, not only for the general public, but also for my team, so that we can ensure that the complaints are processed efficiently and effectively. It would also demonstrate the federal government's transparency and its commitment to Canadians, particularly the consumers and employees affected by the new legislation. Par ailleurs,
in addition to this, another important point is that this system allows these federally registered companies to be under the Charter of the French language. However, in the rest of Canada, these companies would still be subject to the obligations of the new law in the regions where there's a strong Francophone presence. In other words, certain rights, obligations, and remedies will vary depending on which legislation each business chooses. This further underscores the need for a reliable and regularly updated public registry in order to make it easier to identify which businesses are subject to the federal legislation. Another important point is that the draft regulations do not identify one region with a strong Francophone presence in every province and territory. However, access to French language services from federally regulated private businesses is essential to the Canadian population, and this throughout the country.
It is vitally important that communities, parliamentarians, and federally regulated private businesses take the time over the next few months to carefully consider the impact of the regulations on the Canadian public. I have taken note of the concerns of the Quebec English-speaking community about the potential impact of the new legislation on the vitality of that community. I am committed to monitoring its effect on both of Canada's official language minority communities, especially on the Quebec English-speaking communities, considering the concerns that have been raised in providing additional protection to French under the new legislation. In addition, given that my office now has a key role in overseeing the implementation of the new legislation, additional resources will inevitably be needed. I am aware of the current budget constraints and am fully committed to the government's priorities of fiscal discipline and expenditure optimization. However, the implementation of the regulations hinge on additional financial support. En terminant,
to finish, I would like to call on the government to consider the issues I have presented in my position paper in order to ensure that the regulations fully reflect Parliament's intent. There is still time to take full advantage of this historic opportunity to ensure the successful implementation of the use of French in federally regulated private Businesses Act. Thank you for your attention. I will be very happy to answer your questions. You can ask them in either language of the official languages. Thank you very much, Mrs. Berg. We'll start with the Members of Parliament questions. Mr. Gaudin, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mrs. Berg. Last time it was an interview. You're officially a commissioner now, so congratulations, and I'm delighted to work with you over the next few years. Mrs. Berg, you talked at the end of your presentation of the legislator's intention regarding this law, this act. Could you tell us what your understanding is about the intention of the legislator? Describe what it is and what actually doesn't work within this regulation. The lawmaker's intention is integrated into the law, into the Act itself. The Act's purpose is to protect and promote French in the Canadian country, in Quebec and primarily, and then in other strongly Francophone provinces. Just to be clear, Mrs. Commissioner, within your interpretation, did the lawmaker wish to protect and promote both official languages, of which one of which is French, and did it also wish to stop the decline of the use of French? That's the sort of subtext to my question. Well, in the end purpose is absolutely that. I think that the legal framework that I am supervising within my role and my job is there to protect and promote and try and find a solution for the decline of the use of French in Canada. Now, through these various representations, are you saying that the regulation that's on the table, well, we should take our time and do things properly? And are you saying that this regulation is meeting the requirements of the lawmaker? Well, as I said previously, I do not believe that the regulation is really meeting the requirements of the lawmaker within the context of this Act. Mrs. Commissioner, could you tell us more about the qualitative aspects as opposed to the quantitative aspects, which are only the quantitative aspects within the current regulation to describe the regions that have strong French-speaking presence? As you mentioned, within provinces and territories, each of these provinces and territories do not have well-defined regions. And as in my previous role, I've been able to go all the way around Canada. In all of these areas, there are French-speaking communities in a minority situation. So your qualitative criterion, how would you like this to be integrated into this regulation? Well, the qualitative aspect could be integrated by using the Part 4 of the Act on Official Languages. In this Act, we do have certain elements that can or could serve to feed the thought process as to when and how, and we could further improve the presence of these companies in Canada and in each province and territory more specifically. According to my reading, we based ourselves on a formula that works out the number of francophones in relation to the overall population in the region. I do not think this is sufficient. I think that the law, or the Act of the Use of French in federally regulated businesses could help determine where the French speakers are in these regions. We don't take into account the development or the specific aspects of these communities, and we do not even take into account the number of French speakers who live in the Greater Toronto area, which of course signals that there are a lot of French speakers in that region, and that there is also a major presence of private companies in the Greater Toronto region. So I think this would be a very good region to choose as a region of strong Francophone presence. Mrs. Commissioner, could we say that the regulation does not include or excludes British Columbia, other territories also, such as Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, Labrador, and in the way they do things to ensure that companies abide by the law, by the Act?
Identifié comme région à forte présence francophone.
There are some areas that are identified as strong Francophone presence regions. Thankfully, there's the entire region of New Brunswick that is included. Alberta and Manitoba. Sorry, just to cut you off, you have 45 seconds. So what I understand is there's a recommendation from the Official Language Commissioner to include certain regions. Additionally, there's a small region. Let's take my colleague from Halifax. His area is not identified. I think his area should be added. There's a small communities, Francophone communities, should have the right to include federally regulated businesses in the law. What do you think about opening this qualitative aspect into the law? The time is up. One sentence answer, please. As Official Language Commissioner, I always support a larger scope of the application of the law. The floor is yours. 6 minutes. Welcome, witnesses. Congratulations for your new duties. We're happy to have you here. I'm going to follow in Monsieur Godin's footsteps. So, you are saying you would like to expand the scope so that the Act has more strength. When we're talking about regions that are represented, other than, well, let's take Toronto, for example. In Alberta, 1/3 of Francophone communities are in certain areas, Calgary, for example, and then spread a little bit elsewhere. Do you have suggestions? Organizations said we should go above what StatsCan said. How can we expand the scope? What are some things we can do? Do you have ideas? You talked about private businesses. There are many Francophone businesses across Canada that should be taken into account. What is the criteria that should be taken into account so that the Act is substantive? There are ways that we can model other regulatory framework. There is a possibility to identify a formula that will identify areas in the country where the law will be applied, the act rather, and I encourage you to take a look at that. You talked about resources. If we expand the scope of the act, what tools do you need so that we can implement this and think about the budget? Our team started looking at what we need to do to make sure this act is properly applied. We're starting in a different regime. In the new regime, we expect that the central role we will be playing will require more monitoring at the beginning. This monitoring should be expanded on and developed, and the things that are affected by the law will also be monitored later on, where a official language commissioner will monitor the work and the work done from private businesses, federally regulated businesses. So that's work we have to do. Now, second, we're talking about complaints and dealing with complaints. We don't have the specific number of private businesses that will be affected under the law, but we do have some numbers. We have at least 300 businesses that will be affected. We have 261 businesses in Quebec and 163 in strong Francophone presence regions. That's 1,580 new businesses and rather 3,000, more than 3,000 employees in high Francophone regions. The new numbers will be reflected. Even if half of the businesses complaints are dealt with, we will examine what's the next steps. All of the work that we will be doing under the UFPBA will be added to the work that we're already doing on the OLA. Legal work must be done. There will be new interpretations of the law. We will have to have new contacts with new partners. And lastly, we must work with the OQLF, the Canadian Council on Industrial Relations with Canadian Heritage. And if there's no registry that we can use, we must be able to identify who is subject to this act. So receiving complaints, we'll have to go through a much more elaborate process than the one that exists with the OLA. In this case, we don't know the scope or the nature of the current businesses. 30 seconds. So the importance of the registry. Will businesses be confused? Will they think they must conform to the French language charter in Quebec or the UFPBA? Are there other elements that must be held into account to make sure that all of this works for the businesses? Ms. Burke, you have 5 seconds, so one sentence answer, please. So quickly, there are two legislative frameworks. We know what it is in Quebec with the charter, and then there's the UFPBA as well. There might be confusion with both of them. Consumers and employees also may be confused. Thank you, Madame Chanette. Monsieur Beaulieu, 5 minutes. Congratulations, Ms. Commissioner. Do you not find a problem with having two different mandates? You have to defend English and minority Anglophone communities in Quebec, as well as the right to being served and working in French. On the contrary, I think that the Commissioner is well equipped to defend both official languages, English and French. We have the tools that are necessary. There are challenges in Quebec, as well as in regions with a strong Francophone presence. There will be an adjustment period, but we will adapt. In Quebec, there's a lot of debate on this issue. The OQLF, must promote and have some coercive power, and that is what we're doing. That's what we're doing with the OLA. We are promoting, and we are also monitoring and ensuring conformity. Well, earlier you said you noted the problems that the Anglophone community had. Can you tell us more? What I'm seeing is that from the Anglophone community in Quebec there are two issues here. They want to make sure that they will have English services, and the law is not clear for their rights. From what I've read, there is nothing that is preventing private businesses to offer a service, but it's not a guaranteed service. That's one of the things they're worried about. The other thing is the working language, or the language at work, rather. Will Anglophones be at a disadvantage? And if it is the case that they're at a disadvantage when they have to be hired in private businesses, will that be an issue? Now, the impact about all of this is vulnerability, especially socioeconomic vulnerability. Those are the two things I noticed when the Anglophone community testified. Okay, so it seems like English as the language at work is increasing, and French is declining as the language at work, and the UFPBA is there. In an article from Le Droit, you said that you would continue to defend Francophones outside of Quebec and Anglophones in Quebec at an equal level. So this principle, symmetry, that before in the old law, we were talking about an equality between these two minority groups. Do you think the Anglophones in Quebec need to be equivalent to Francophones outside of Quebec? My role is to protect both official languages in Quebec, including French in Quebec and English in Quebec. My mandate is to ensure that federal institutions are monitored so that federal institutions can follow the law, and so that they serve Francophone and Anglophone communities across the country. Part 7 of the Act that was modified encroaches not only on federal institutions, but it encroaches on everything that has to do with services. It's promoting English, and I hope one day it will promote French. Last week, WestJet testified. They said they want to be withdrawn from Bill 101, but be subject to the UFPBA. Do you think many businesses who must follow Bill 101, do you think they will want this as well? I don't necessarily know private businesses' intentions. What I do know is that in the law, the UFPBA will be applied. Companies will have the choice to either remain subject to the Charter or conform to the obligations from the UFPBA. But I think the objective will be the same. It is to offer and strengthen the use of services in French in and especially outside of Quebec. 30 seconds, Monsieur Beaulieu. WestJet, do you think the way WestJet operates is normal? I think companies will be well served and should hire as many bilingual employees across the country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beaulieu. Dear colleagues, we're going to move on to the second round of questions, and I'm going to hand the floor to Mr. Dalton for 5 minutes. Congratulations from me too for once again for having been appointed Commissioner. I'm delighted to see you. We've listened to various witnesses here, and almost all of the witnesses, apart from maybe WestJet, were somewhat disappointed with what's happening with the regulations. I don't know what they had thought would happen. You even started by saying that regulations don't meet the needs. So my question is, should we start over with these regulations? Do you think that what we have already is useful, sufficiently useful? Now, to come back to what I said initially, what I'm trying to find or obtain with these regulations is a framework that will contribute to the optimum operations of the use of French in Federally Private Businesses Act. So the regulations need to be tweaked to a certain extent so that they can actually accomplish this objective and actually meet the purpose of the law, which is to strengthen French and the use of French and promote the use of French in the country. And what will happen, as far as I'm concerned, is that there will be a fragmented application. The regulation is not clear enough within its definitions. Communications is not well defined or defined well enough. Neither is the word service, neither is the word consumer. That's not defined at all. And these are just a few examples in which the regulation, I believe, does not fulfill the duties and expectations that we hold for this a regulatory framework that is meant to make things simpler and clearer. Thank you. I'm MP in British Columbia. I've just received an email from the Francophone Federation from British Columbia, and it says the method suggested by them to define what is a reason of strong French-speaking presence will leave our province on the side and will have an impact on services, among others banking services, despite the growth of our community. And this will go against the modernizing of the rule, whose aim was to improve the protection of the French language. They're not happy. We've listened to comments from Toronto. There are 200,000 francophones there, and they're deemed to not be to have a strong presence there. It's the same thing for Vancouver. Could you say a few more words about this, please? Absolutely, that's what I said previously. I think that the formula or the system used to calculate it is not sufficiently strong in terms of its impact. And what we wish to obtain in the end is to extend the reach of the UFPBA to ensure that in each territory and province of Canada, we have at least one company that will be able to propose or offer these services. Let's not forget the role of the law itself, of the Act, is to strengthen, to promote, and to protect the French language. And if we do it only in some regions, I don't think that will be sufficient. A few seconds left. There's still tension or difficulties between encouraging and supporting the Francophone community, but not imposing too many regulations. There's a real balance.
To accommodate Francophone clients and employees, how will your office treat companies of different sizes? Will you be stronger or tougher on the large ones or on the small ones, or you'll recognize the different capacities?
Il y a 15 secondes qui restent.
Well, clearly, my mandate is prescribed by legislation, so the approach that I take will be consistent, I think, across the board. But I always come back to, what is practical and what is happening on the ground. And what I am reading into many of the presentations that I have heard so far, particularly WestJet and others, is that the question of whether and how they are going to be able to conform to the legislation is going to be critical. And that means staffing and people who are able to actually work in both languages and in French in particular. So that's where I turn to Heritage Canada, where I say there's going to have to be a very strong movement to ensure that we've got manpower, women power, people power.
Ms. Burke, I have to cut you off. I'm sorry.
To ensure the services can be provided.
I had some extra time, but we were well over. Oui, on va voir.
Yes, we'll see. I'm going to hand the floor to Ms. de Chantario for 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation and for the documents. You're suggesting a widening of the regulation. We've also had other witnesses suggesting the same thing. The question is, what do we answer to those who ask us these questions? The balance between the rights of French-speaking workers and also the widening of the law, and also the operational reality of companies in regions where there are fewer French speakers. I'm not talking about the regions already defined in the law, in the Act. The evaluation has already been made. But so how do we find this for the other areas? How do we find this balance? Well, I believe that coming back to Part 4 on the Official Languages Act, shows us which criteria we can use to identify regions that go beyond the regions that are already identified in the law. And what I see is a duty that falls on Heritage Canada to start an impact analysis of this law, this act, on the various communities. And this research has to account for capacity in the areas that have already been identified. And they also have to take into account the impact of the Act on the official languages communities in Quebec, as we mentioned earlier on. And the balance, the fair balance, I think, lies in the impact analysis to establish and find where the margins for maneuver are for the lawmakers. Another question that I have in your document, you talked about the duties and obligations in terms of public communication. You talked about a concept. Could you tell us more about it? Well, I was talking. So, l'offre active is not a term that you find in this in the UFPBA, but in official languages we do find it. And what we mean by this is an offer. It's an effective offer. It's accessible to the public at large to ensure that the public knows where to find these services in English and in French. And what I'm asking for is a harmonization with concepts that have already been defined and undefined to a certain extent in a law that we're already monitoring, and that we want the UFPBA to reflect this active offer in the context of official languages. Now, the question of the public register, you're not the first to mention this. How do you perceive it? Could you give us a little answer in 30 seconds? Well, the public register, of course, is in the hands of PCH. They're going to have to make a list of the private companies that will fall within it, there will be a transition period, of course, because private companies are already subject to this charter, and there will be a transition period to know which among these businesses will end up subject to the UFPBA, and the register will have to account for these companies and register them. And we also want this register to be up-to-date, reliable, and it has to be updated on a monthly basis so that the public at large can actually find the services and know where they are. Otherwise, it will be very complicated. Thank you. And just Mr. D'Entremont is going to take the last 2 minutes. Okay, 2 minutes for Acadians. When it comes from New Nova Scotia, as we heard from the Acadian Federation last week, if Francophones are spread around the province, so in the region of Ch'tican, there's not a strong French presence, so that's not applicable. And the biggest region that we're talking about at the moment is Halifax. So what do you think of the additional provincial capital in the province? Well, I agree with this. It's something that we have included in the Official Languages Act, and we can look at the Official Languages Act to find the best model to use. In Nova Scotia, we have Yarmouth, Digby, Richmond, and I agree the major city of Halifax should be among these cities. And do you think that this will be the city itself, or will it be areas or neighborhoods in the city? When you look at Halifax and Dartmouth, there are more French speakers in Dartmouth than elsewhere. So will it be neighborhoods or will it be the whole city? Well, I think we're going to have to do a survey to really define which is the best region that will allow for the best quality of services, and then and that will reach the greatest number of citizens who wish to have services in French. Thank you very much, Mr. D'Entremont. And now I'm going to hand the floor to Mr. Beaulieu for 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. Very quickly, to come back to the earlier question, you answered the question about hiring bilingual employees everywhere only. Is it realistic outside of Quebec, just having bilingual employees or hiring bilingual employees? Well, I said if private companies ought to hire as many bilingual people as other places in the country. Is that not discriminatory, the fact that in Quebec they require only bilingual staff? Well, something to look at for hiring practices in companies. What I back, of course, is that the company can reflect as far as possible with their staff, with future and current staff, so that this staff can serve the English-speaking community and the French-speaking community. You're not answering my question. You can serve both communities with staff, single language staff, French-speaking and English-speaking. It's a bit difficult, or it's a bit too much asking for bilingual staff for all employees employed in Quebec. Is that the requirement at the moment? Well, that's what WestJet told us. Okay, that's something we need to look at then. Thank you. Now, in your positioning, you talked about Quebec. You said that there are two systems on the same territory, which led to a great deal of complexity. I think that two competitive systems bring less inefficiency because people know who to appeal to if they have a complaint. Could you tell us a bit more about this and how we can make this more clear-cut and more efficient? Well, if we raise awareness more, as I said in the beginning, I think that the public at large, employers, consumers, employees, will be maybe mixed up in this new system, and they might find it difficult to navigate, but it will sort itself out over time. But with two frameworks that legislative frameworks that explain what duties are, that requires more awareness, of course, and people to understand the system better. Well, would it not have been easier to just have one system in the end? Well, it's up to politicians and MPs to decide what the best, or parliamentaries to decide what the best solution should be. Monsieur Beaulieu, we've run out of time, so one sentence answer, please. Well, up until now, well, okay. So we're very much looking forward to working with you once this law has been put in place. Monsieur Gaudin, you have 5 minutes now. Thank you, Chair, Miss Commissioner. You said earlier on that it's not very well defined for services, consumers, and then there was another element that you also mentioned that I unfortunately did not jot down. Could you please just repeat it? Consumers, Article 7 of the law is not defined. Services and communication, what we're suggesting is that... Okay, it's just the 3 words. Thank you. I'm just jotting them down. And then we'll make a recommendation on this. Thank you. That was very relevant. Now, let's talk about the register. In the current Act, there's a lot of sort of floppiness. We talk about yearly declarations, renewing things every year to be compliant, and then the ministry is going to send, well, the department is going to send out a certification. Could the register be more efficient, be more straightforward and strict? And what happens when people aren't compliant and they're not recorded on the register? What's your opinion on this? Well, compliance and the consequences. We've noted that it's not present in the Act. As far as the register is concerned, as far as I can see, it's going to help us a great deal if we have a register that's very simple to follow, that's up to date, and that responds to any person or systems needs that are going to take part in the service. Do you have the means to actually update this register? No, we're not going to be doing the updates for the register. PCHs. That's a lot for PCH, isn't it? I wanted to just tell you that. That's what I think. Something else now. Now, I asked this question to Québec Collectif last time, Droit Collectif Québec last time, Collective Rights Quebec, about the fact that we know that in Quebec, the CAC government, under the trusteeship of the Minister for Official Languages, Jean-François Roberge, has allowed us to divide and enabled companies in Quebec to choose. And I agree with the organization that I previously mentioned, that we should have given responsibility of this to Quebec. Now, within this situation, could we hand over the mandate for federally chartered companies in Quebec so that it's managed by the OQFL, the official bureau, Quebec Bureau for Official Languages? Well, I would leave this to the lawmakers. Well, at some point, it's going to come into your pipeline, but you're going to have quite a lot of work to do on your office. Well, we work with structures that are part of the whole implementation and implementation of the law. The Bureau, as I mentioned earlier on, the Canadian Council for Industrial Relations as well, ourselves, PCH. Well, we're sort of spread around. PCH, there's the Commissioner, the Canadian Tribunal. It's all spread around, and it's probably the method that we've chosen to give people the impression that we're going to be very aggressive and very strict in stopping the decline of French and promoting both official languages. But actually, in reality, you've noted the same thing. This regulation is sort of gold powder, and with the experience that you have and the experience that I have as a lawmaker, we've noted that there might not necessarily be results, and we might not necessarily meet the targets. We're sort of pushing everything, aside, and we're just throwing this all out there. Do you have the same opinion as me? Well, we're aiming for very concrete results, and we have a model that works very well with the Observatory for the law for the law on official languages, and it's also something that's going to work very well for the UFPBA. So you said we're going to have to develop a system. There's a cost associated with this. How much do you estimate we will need from the government for the commission? that they will have to give to the office to add these operations. 30 seconds left. So this amount is being currently analyzed, but there are additional tasks associated with it. I was told that it would be 7 million. How much do you think you'll need?
I don't know the exact number. It's hard to calculate. We still don't have a number that defines the number of private federally regulated businesses that we're going to have to look over. The numbers I gave you earlier said that there was over 70,000 new employees that have the right to work in the language of their choice. That means the number of complaints that we're going to have to manage will be a lot larger. And we have to see how many complaints we get before that. Monsieur Gaudin, your time is up. Sorry, I was into it. Okay, the floor is yours, Mr. Villeneuve. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's great to have you here again. You always have a wonderful smile. Thank you. We all would like to be ambitious and to have a large scope. We're trying to increase the number of francophones in every province and territory. But there are limits, the Canadian economy being one of them. Do you think businesses will be able to reach the requirements when it comes to labor? What I've said in the past was there was a lack of consistency with the way we calculated each area. Would this be realistic? Yes. In each province, there should be federally regulated businesses that can offer services. However, a qualified workforce needs to be developed, and it will go back to the heritage, Canadian heritage, to analyze the need and extend the scope across the country. Thank you. Please define some terms. Earlier you spoke about them. Can you tell us more? When we're talking about consumer, and this means that there is a business exchange of sorts, a larger term such as public or the public at large doesn't constrain that term to a certain business exchange. So consumer and public, they must be two different terms. The public is a much larger term. A consumer at the airport is the person who has a ticket and takes a flight. But let's say the person who drops the person off at the airport, is that a consumer? They might go up to the counter and ask for a service because the flight was delayed, but that person should be able to receive the services in the language of their choice. Okay, so I'm just checking what you wrote here. The role of the office also involves coordinating and making it clear between Canadian heritage, industrial relations, the OQLF. Can you explain more about that? Okay, in Quebec there are two regimes. These regimes apply the law, the Charter, and now the UFPBA is getting added to this. There's a choice here that must be made between these two acts. So the laws in each act are different. The enforcement is done by me when it's the UFPBA, and then when it's for the Charter, the OQLF enforces that law. If we don't know which business decides to fall under which act, we will have to work to find the act that the businesses decide to fall under. Canadian Heritage is in charge of the registry. The registry informs us as to where the business is. Has the business decided to be subject to the UFPBA or the Charter? This is a registry, and the registry will let us identify this. And we will consult with Canadian Heritage to find out more, to see where the business is. A few seconds. Okay, and finally, when it comes to the Canadian Council on Industrial Relations, the Commissioner, myself, has a power. My power is to transfer complaints. I can transfer complaints to the Council. It depends on the circumstance and the complexity of the complaint. So I can transfer this complaint to the Council. So this doesn't currently exist, but with the UFPBA, it will exist. Okay, colleagues, we have roughly 7 or 8 minutes left with Ms. Burke and her team. I talked with my colleagues, and we want to use every minute possible with you. So we will do one last round of questions, a shortened round. 2 minutes for each member. Monsieur Beaulieu, you will have 1 minute. Monsieur Godin, 1 minute. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last week, the RCFA talked about dissemination areas as a criteria to select areas where a number currently doesn't justify the need as to date. This dissemination area, is it something that would be positive to add regions? This could be a criteria that we could evaluate. Among other things that would inform us how we apply the law and consider strong Francophone regions, or regions with a strong Francophone presence, rather. Will you give the committee suggestions on how we can expand for provinces and territories as well as for small municipalities? What criteria should we use and give to the Treasury Board so they can reach their goal? Yes, we can give you this information. We will draw on Part 4 of the Official Languages Act. I heard that you said you will take your time. It doesn't seem like anything is an emergency. It received royal assent in 2023, and then it took a few years after that. We're not just a few weeks out. I think that is a good idea. In the regulation, it says in Clause 4, for Quebec and for businesses 2 years later elsewhere in the country, outside of Quebec. This is the only time they mention you. The minister can give the commissioner a list of federally regulated private businesses. What do you think of this? Don't you think the minister must provide the commissioner? Will they really do it if they don't have the obligation? If they aren't held accountable? Your time is up. We need one answer, one sentence. Yes, an obligation and not just a discretionary measure. Thank you, Monsieur Godin. Monsieur Alguerry for 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Are you satisfied with the government's efforts to protect and promote the French language in federal institutions, as well as to protect every Canadian's right to be served in French in federally regulated private businesses? When it comes to federal institutions and complying with the OLA, that is my mandate. What we notice is that there's still work to do. That's what we've noticed due to the complaints. In some situations, federal institutions comply, and others they don't. There are systemic problems. Every year, we're facing the same problems when it comes to complying with the law, especially when it comes to communications and service provision. The language at work is becoming a problem. 22% of the complaints we've received are on the language at work. So you asked me, is the government complying? In some ways, yes, but there's a lot of work to do. 25 seconds left. 25, okay. So let's say, in cases of non-compliance, what are the measures you are taking so that they do comply with the law? The next step would be in the OLA. I have powers that go above and beyond the powers that I had in the past. But there are ways that we can deal with complaints, investigate, find solutions, make recommendations. This commissioner position always had these possibilities. There are also ways that we can make sure businesses are complying. There are measures that could be put in place, investigative measures as well, and we can signal to Canadians what are the challenges in the system. Okay, your time is up. I need to cut you off now. Okay, Monsieur Beaulieu, 1 minute. Earlier you said that the goal was for people to work in the language of their choice, but that is not the UFPBA or the French Language Charter's goal. You can't work in both at the same time. There must be a common language, and the goal of the Act is for Quebec and regions with a strong francophone presence that French be the general language. The language of choice is applicable for the Official Languages Act, and in the UFPBA, they can also make a choice. Well, it's not that there are agreements, but usually in a business, French must be the generalized language, the overall language. Well, the UFPBA provides that in Quebec and in regions with a strong francophone presence, employees can choose to work in French. Monsieur Gadin, 2 minutes. Okay, this is my last question for you. The previous question you asked was telling. Business, there's nothing for the 1/3 of businesses that will not be in the UFPBA. The goal of the UFPBA is to protect both official languages. So you're working on the third parties. We're talking about the third parties now. For these third parties, they are going to do business with certain people. When it comes to UFPBA and federally regulated businesses, they are going to be working with providers, and they must also work in French.
I think that it's important that third parties, well, Article 23 and Article 25 identify obligations and duties of third parties. 25 and 23. Yes, thank you. 30 seconds. Do you think that the Treasury Board and civil servants or public servants should go back to the drawing board to rework their regulation as was recommended, or as we will recommend for Part 7? You can see that there are a lot of aspects that are not covered. Do we need to redo the work and take the time to do things properly, and then have the right tools, efficient tools, to achieve our targets? Mrs. Burke, one sentence answer. We have no more time. As far as Part 7 of the Official Languages Act, no, I'm talking about Part 7, where we've asked Council to go back and look at it. Well, an impact analysis, I think, is necessary. I'm now handing the floor to Mr. Jeanette for 2 minutes. Now, to continue our very interesting conversation, other guests told us about revising the regulations every 5 years to really account for the changes in the Francophone communities, whilst never going backwards within the given territories. What do you think about this? Well, revising the regulation every 5 years gives a good view of things, but doesn't necessarily allow for the regulation to be implemented after a 5-year period. We're not always in a good position to assess the impact of the regulation in terms of its application, full application. But yes, it would give us a vision and results of some sort, but we would also have much better results if we were to do this after a period of 10 years. And this is, of course, compliant with the review of the Act after a period of 10 years. So how can we adjust? Because we can see that Francophone immigration is going well. We're meeting our standards. We are there to encourage bilingualism in Canada. If we want to have more encouragements and each organization were to widen their territory, do you have any other suggestions to be able to adapt and have this suppleness over the next 10 years? Well, in identifying these regions with strong French-speaking presence, we could account for the development of the communities and the thriving of the communities with different qualitative elements, not just quantitative. And we can see that these elements are developing. All communities are, of course, going to develop. There are special aspects within these communities that we need to account for, and this could also be part of the whole development of the application of the Act, and the regulation could identify this and carry these tests out. Thank you very much, Madame Jeanette. Mrs. Burke, in the name of the whole committee, I would like to thank you. Thank you to your colleagues for being with us here today. The last time you were here was during the your interview period, and now we're very lucky to be able to work together. That was a very good beginning. Thank you very much, and thank you to colleagues. I'm going to suspend the meeting, and we're going to move into closed session.
you.